Okay, so let's start here. Welcome to this stream. We're taking a look at Vagabonds of Dyfed. I believe that is how the game is pronounced, or the name of the place it's based on is pronounced. Yeah, let's take a look. There's the title. So Dyfed is a place in Wales. It's like far west of Wales. It used to be a sort of small kingdom in Wales, and I have no idea what its relationship is to this game. I'm sorry to say, that's the extent of my research. All I know is how to pronounce it, and that's about it. But this is an interesting game, so let's have a look at it. As you can see, this game was written in this year by Ben Dutter, and it is inspired and based on games by John Harper, Emmett Moshe. Apologies for my pronunciation there. He is the author of City of Mist. Vincent McGay Baker, who wrote Apocalypse World, of course. Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson, and Tom Moldvay, who were responsible for Dungeons & Dragons, and Tom Moldvay specifically for the Moldvay edition of Basic Dungeons & Dragons, which is kind of the sort of foundational text of the OSR in many ways. All right. So this is a game powered by the Apocalypse, and its design was heavily informed by Apocalypse World and World of Dungeons. I would say it's also quite heavily informed by Blades in the Dark, or possibly you could say Lady Blackbird. So this is a game that has some mechanical similarities to what I've been doing personally with All Systems Nominal. But it does some interesting stuff beyond what I was thinking of, so I want to go through it and I want to have a look. All right, so we got our table of contents. Nothing too special there. Some nice art. You know, there's some nice black and white art all the way through the book. It's not quite as striking as what we saw in the Mecha Hack, but it definitely does the job. And there's a lot of it. Also, really nice use of typography in this book. Although some of the, I would say some of the layout it seems a little bit, it's not quite there quality-wise. You know, the general use of this font and the general layout is quite nice. And I think that some of the weirdness about the way that the layout looks has to probably do with the fact that, as far as I understand, the printed copy of this game is a square book, kind of similar to Mouse Guard, I think. So the legal-sized page, which I think is what this is probably like a totally different formatting from the print edition of the book. So that's a thing. Anyway, what is this? It is PBTA World of Dungeons inspired. It involves using 2d6 plus a mod, like all Apocalypse World games. However, it has way more gradient successes, and it uses a sum of freeform traits instead of attributes. So as I said, those of you who are familiar with Lady Blackbird will recognize a lot of similarities with this game. And then we have supplemental moves as techniques, and these all feed into one core move like in World of Dungeons. So Vagabonds of Dyfed is an extensive hack of several Powered by the Apocalypse games, namely John Harper's World of Dungeons and Blades in the Dark, mixed in with a dash of some others, especially City of Mist, with the aim of being compatible, and this is important, compatible with OSR systems, modules, and supplements. In fact, there's a lot in this book to help with that compatibility, which I think is pretty awesome. It is a thing that is sort of implied in World of Dungeons in a way, because it uses hit dice in the same way that many OSR systems do. But there's a lot more support in this text for that intercompatibility with stuff that is based on BX D&D. Yeah. Okay. So he says, I took some of my favorite parts of lots of other games, some small and some large, some old and some bleeding edge new, and kludged and cobbled and sewed them together into a game my friends and I enjoy playing. The core mechanic is the same from World of Dungeons and many other PBTA games, some 2d6 plus a mod. There's only a single basic move with a familiar split between failure, complication, and success. There aren't any playbooks. Okay, there aren't any playbooks. None. Characters are built off of a series of free-form descriptors and mechanically defined widgets. Okay. It's quick and dirty, but it works with old-school BX, Osric, and a bunch of other stuff I had in my bookcase without offending my story gamer sensibilities. So for somebody who is a OSR purist, I don't think this is going to be the game for them. If you go over to the Questing Beast channel, you can see that the review there was not terribly positive for this game. However, in terms of the space between Blades and World of Dungeons that I'm personally interested in, I think this is a very cool game. All right, so principles. Interestingly, they start with your principles. That's something that most PBTA games don't do. Focuses on challenge and impartiality. So this is really very standard OSR principles. This is the stuff we've seen if you watched my design streams for writing to the Halls of the Stormlord. You would have seen me go through Principia Apocrypha and seen a lot of this stuff in there already. So the game is about challenging the player as much as it is about creating a shared story. Rather than collaborating to tell an interesting tale, you're inhabiting the minds of characters who believe their world to be very real. That world behaves with internal consistency, some measure of predictability, and the cold, hard impartiality of our own reality. It's brutally fair, even to a fault. This means that the world exists whether or not the player characters ever show up. Factions rise and quarrel and wither, ecosystems evolve, and creatures feast upon each other. Player characters die from the unlucky roll of the dice. Such is the cold hand of fate. The world and its antagonists don't exist solely to challenge the player characters. They don't scale to match PC interests, nor do they exist as some form of balanced encounter. If the star characters wander into a dungeon or swamp with creatures far more powerful than they can survive, so be it. All this is to say that GMs should treat the world like a carefully cultivated ant farm, only to introduce a cadre of termites in their midst and shake the hell out of the box. The characters should fear the danger as it is real, but they should also respect the internal logic and chaos of the world. It may be cruel, but it is absolutely inexorably fair. So yeah, I mean, this is the standard OSR thing of the world doesn't care about you, right? The world does not care about you. It is not in the story games mode of let's build a plot arc, and is also not in the trad mode of let's provide a smooth difficulty curve. It is neither of those things. It is this, play the game as a war, play the game as objective, play the game as an uncaring world. Yes, so Mikhail says, I like it too. I like it also very much compared to Dungeon World. Seems much more open since it isn't limited by the moves in the same way. Yes, I agree with you on that point. I agree quite a bit. I will say that Dungeon World feels, well, personally in that sort of Dungeon World mode, so far, at least what I've seen with the development, I prefer Worlds of Adventure if I'm trying to make a game that is more in the heroic fantasy post 3rd edition D&D model. You know, where the characters are the heroes and the world sort of revolves around them. For doing more OSR stuff, I find that... So I haven't run this game yet, but what I see here is a lot more appealing to me in some ways than World of Dungeons. Because there is some room to take into account the situation mechanically. And I know there are people in the OSR who will say you shouldn't do that. Don't do that. Don't take the situation into account mechanically beyond just advantage, disadvantage. Don't bother with that. No, you shouldn't do it. You should look to the fiction first, the objectivity of the world first, and only in the breach should the players ever roll. And I don't think that this is that kind of game, and we'll see why. So the characters are impactful on the world. The players' ideas are meaningfully represented in the game. And the way in which this is done in this game is different from most OSR games. But they have the same motivating principle behind them, which is that if the players are ingenious, if the players come up with good problem solving, they should be rewarded within the fiction for that. And yeah, and part of that is being honest, right? Being honest about the capabilities of the opposition and the world. As the GM, that is a thing you need to do. That is a thing that John Harper talks a lot about regarding Blades. And we'll see that that sort of ethos carries through into this game. It is a thing that was originally inspired by John Harper playing OSR games, taking that into Blades, and then now we see it coming back from Blades into this game. All right. So you make meaningful choices. There's no railroading. There's no 3-plot structure. This is not a game that is played according to the rules of screenwriting or storytelling or anything like that. And you know, focusing in on the details of PC action in the world is important. How the player interacts with the environment is significant in an OSR game. If you give the players meaningful things to hook onto and manipulate in the world, then that allows them to feel their ingenuity and feel rewarded for being clever. Okay, so those are the principles. And again, I basically want to say that there's nothing that is not OSR there. It's all very OSR. It's when we get to the mechanics that we start to see a little bit of a difference. So, when you attempt an action that's difficult, relevant, and may cause an unwanted outcome, roll 2d6 and add your aptitude, the sum of relevant positive and negative tags, to a maximum of +3 or a minimum of -3. Tags are discussed more in character creation. So you and the GM work out what tags are relevant. Helpful tags give +1 aptitude. Harmful tags give -1 aptitude. You can only roll once per action until circumstances change. Okay, so what we're seeing here is instead of advantage, disadvantage, which I personally find, as somebody who likes to capture the relevant fiction in the mechanics, I find advantage, disadvantage to be quite limited and to not really help me very much as a GM to convey the situation. Having this aptitude helps to judge in a more fine-grained way, similar to building your dice pool in Blades in the Dark, what is going on, what is the relevant situation, representing that in the fiction, and then making the roll. Finally, you can only roll once per action, so this is the let it ride principle that you see in many other games. You don't roll the same thing again and again. All right, so the roll results. This is something that's different from most PBTA games. You can get a 6 or less as a miss, 7 to 9 is partial success, and a 10 to 12 is a complete success. 13 or more is a crit. So they increase the band of what the rolls can be here. So this means that it is... You can judge the results in a more meaningful way, even if the player is rolling at a high advantage, like a +2 or +3. Whereas in most PBTA games, if the player has a +3 in the stat, it's basically meaningless for them to even roll for it because they're probably going to succeed anyway. Like, you're just going to get the partial success or the success. Once you get into that +3 range in most PBTA games, you're just a god. You're a demigod, right? You are just... Like, you know, World of Dungeons is supposed to be like this OSR game, but it's very easy in World of Dungeons to get a stat up to +3 and then just steamroll your way through the game because you have this god stat that you can rely on. And I find that to be quite unsatisfying in long-term play. And this seems like it would allow a little bit more runway than most PBTA games give you in terms of stat progression. So I like that, and I also like the judging the situation aspect of it. All right, so character creation. You define your character concept, so this is like your high concept in Fate, right? Like what kind of person is your character? And then you write a short phrase for each of the following trait tags. So your approach to conflict, your goal driven by a cause or ethos, your gimmick, a unique and memorable trait, your background, what you used to do or be, your foreground, what you are, do, or have skill in, and your weakness, a gap in your abilities. These will affect your aptitude on various roles. Describe more on how to play. So yeah, this is pretty cool, right? This is like, so you get your character concept. I mean, it can be a little bit challenging to come up with a concept out of the blue, but there are pre-gen characters later in the text that you can just sort of draw on. But more importantly, these different cues for the different traits, I think, are quite well done. They really drive to particular things, and I think they're very, very short. They don't give you a lot of text, but I do think that they would get your imagination going enough to be able to flesh out your character in numerous dimensions instead of just like, you know, I feel like in Fate Core, at least, the game really just like throws you into the deep end and is like, I don't know, like you come up with a concept, you come up with some traits, and like whatever, just figure it out. Like, no, like there are Fate products that are a little bit more focused, like Dresden Files Accelerated, which I like more. But I prefer to have these kind of specific things that your character is going to have, right? Like if you're generating traits, there should be cues that help players imagine what their character is, because otherwise you just get overwhelmed by the tyranny of choice, right? It's a blank slate, and it causes paralysis in the mind. For many people, not all people, but many people. And that's a consistent problem I've seen in Fate games. Yeah, so this is pretty cool for coming up with your character. And then write at least a short phrase for your core flaw. A lie about the world that you believe. A fear that you can't get over. a selfishness or vice that you can't ignore or resist. Again, just more very good, short, evocative text that is going to get your mind going. Pick one technique, a knack, or special advantage. So again, this would be like a stunt in Fate. And a list of techniques is available on page 18, which is helpful. Then you pick a lineage, and this is interesting, a species, bloodline, or background that affects your body and culture. So it's not like a race necessarily like in many D&D inspired fantasy games. It could be something quite different. But if you want to play to that, you can, right? If you want your lineage to be an elf, then okay, that's fine. But if you want your lineage to be something more cultural, then that's cool too. So that's quite nice. And then you have HP. You start with 8 HP and you gain 4 HP per level. Very similar to World of Dungeons. If one of your trait tags shows you're especially tough or lucky, the GM can grant you plus 1 HP. So it's similar to like taking the tough special ability in World of Dungeons. You can just do that. Cool. So there's an example of making a character. And now we have traits. So not only do they give you those nice questions that help you to come up with traits yourself, they also give you a list to draw on. As was mentioned on the Questing Beast review, there certainly is a downside to the way they've done this, where these absolutely should have been numbered. These should have been numbered so that you could roll them up randomly. Now, I understand that this game is more sort of driving towards the kind of like bespoke character creation, like developing a coherent concept and that kind of thing. But just having a numbered list does help to just let people roll if they feel the need to, right? And you know, you could just copy paste this into a Google Doc and give it numbers, and that would be fine. But it is a little bit irritating that this doesn't have numbers on it. That would be a definite benefit. Lineage heritage is what I hacked into White Hack instead of just species. Yeah, and I think that the way it's phrased here is quite nice. It's quite open and suggestive of ideas. Yeah, so they give you all these options, such as kill all goblins, very traditional. All right, so lineages. These lineages are basically suggestions for what you might take. You can kind of make up your own, but there's some detailed descriptions here. So you can be a human, right? You get bonus HP, you get XP triggers. So this is very similar to Dungeon World. And you get like a stunt, basically. You can also get fictional tags, like you have permission to attempt otherwise impossible tasks, to remember esoteric facts or specific information, or to solve puzzles. And, you know, I would kind of like to see... Is there a procedure for making your own lineage, or a suggestion for that? That's kind of what I'm interested in here. It doesn't really seem like it, and so that is something I would have liked to see in the text. Because, you know, in World of Dungeons, that make your own class thing, a little tiny blurb, is really helpful and can help you to make really cool classes. So I would have liked to see here a little write-up on how to write your own lineages. Even if it is somewhat obvious from what is there, I'd like to see more help for the player. Okay, and then techniques. Each character starts with one technique and gains one new technique per level. The technique selected must have been reasonably acquired through learning, providence, infestation, or magic. So you can't just have it with no fictional background at all. So Adept allows you to use magic. You pick spells from the list below equal in number to your level. Each time you gain a level, pick another spell. You don't need to roll to cast one, but you can use them as part of a roll. So you don't need to roll to cast, but you can use them as like a factor in another roll you're making. So Distill Azoth, Hand of Force. This is very Vancian magic, right? And I assume you can make your own. Arcanist. These are basically similar to your special abilities in World of Dungeons, right? Like they're very similar to that. Give you a little bit more text, but that's about it. Some of these are moves, like in the PBTA style. Kind of interesting. And there's quite a few of these here to draw on. I won't go through all of them, but just to show you they exist. And then the gameplay. So that's like all the core rules right there already. Like we got the core role and we got the character creation. And then from there you just kind of go. But there's a lot of stuff to help you out. So we saw that already. It's just repeated there for the sake of usability, so you don't have to flip back and forth in the book. It's kind of nice. And there's a specific description from the author here of what their reasoning was for coming up with tags. It says, Vagabonds is designed to simplify and unify the mechanics of PBTA games and OSR games. Basically, anything can be treated as a tag, which acts as a mechanical and narrative modifier. Rolls should never get modified by more than -3 or +3 aptitude, since that's about the limit of what makes sense on a 2d6 roll. If things are really severe, the GM can just say that something is impossible or happens without a roll. If you're not sure how to handle something, the game is designed to revert to its simplest engine, roll 2d6. Add some tags and interpret the results based on the normal split of 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 12, and 13 plus. The GM and even the players can sort of eyeball the math for tags and aptitude. It's easy for the GM to just say, you've got -2 aptitude and advantage because of XYZ circumstances. Don't get too hung up on every crunchy widget unless you enjoy that type of thing, and even if you do, don't let it slow down play so much that people start pulling out their phones and stop paying attention. So, you know, you can play more to the side of Lady Blackbird, or you can play more to the side of Burning Wheel. It's up to you, but whatever you do, just make it interesting. Yeah. So you can change your stance, which is quite interesting. This is a purely fictional declaration. Like I am going in high risk. I'm going in low risk. I'm going in normal, and this is quite quite similar in a way to your loadout in Blades in the Dark, right? You're positioning yourself. Advantage and disadvantage. As was mentioned in the Questing Beast review, this is silly. Like, no, we don't need this. Like, why would you want advantage and disadvantage when you already have granularity in setting the circumstances for the roll, right? Like, you can already make a judgment on aptitude. You don't need advantage and disadvantage. It just feels like overkill. Concentration. Yeah. I mean, this is just a fictional thing, right? You can require concentration to perform a specific task. If it gets broken, then the spell is broken. Or ritual is broken, interrupted, whatever. Similar to in many other games, it's just not really mechanized in any way. Permission. So this is more like, from having a tag, a character can have permission to do a thing in addition to getting bonuses at the thing, right? So this is a slightly different effect. Instead of giving you a modifier to your aptitude, it can allow things in the fiction, and that's very OSR, right? You have this trait, like you have Pyromancer, and that gives you permission to control fire through concentration and magical energy. If you were just trying to do that, you didn't have any related tag, it would be bending the limits of the fiction. But because you have the tag, it's a thing you can do. And once per session, you or the GM can get you into or out of a terrible spot by engaging with your core flaw. Doing this gives you distinct authorial control. So this is very Fate, right? This is, I mean, maybe this is calling back to City of Mist. I haven't read City of Mist, so it's probably a reference to that. But this is a very Fate-ish idea. Doing this gives you distinct authorial control. While the GM can always get you into trouble, doing this makes the situation even more legitimate. You don't have to engage with your core flaw every session, and probably shouldn't. When you engage with your core flaw, the GM frames a scene and you describe how your character wriggles in or out of the nasty situation. Your allies are likely hindered or harmed, or you'll suffer some consequences down the road. It's also kind of similar to your Vice in Blades in the Dark, right? And then there's a little write-up here on fictional positioning. So for those of you who are not familiar with fictional positioning, this may be of interest. There's an interesting point here. So fictional positioning talk, the setting of aptitude, can quickly devolve into a Mother May I style of authoritarian GMing. Oh boy, yeah. This game isn't free-form roleplay. The GM is there to objectively adjudicate and make rulings in the spirit of verisimilitude and the game's principles. But with this responsibility comes a high demand for trust. Misuse that trust, and the game and group will quickly fold. So yeah, that pressure is on the GM in this, right, to make those judgments and to be fair. But arguably better than getting stuck and bogged down in some very overly involved character creation that doesn't really do much for the fiction. Okay, so your character, you have equipment and speed. Again, very similar to World of Dungeons. And your speed and your encumbrance have opposite relations to each other. Loading down a limb gives you -1 penalty to speed. Armor further lowers speed equal to its armor rating. Those with the highest speed tend to go first in a fight or win in a foot race, but other factors may apply. When you reach -5 speed, you're encumbered and you can't move with any agility or alacrity. At 7, you can't move at all. So yeah, it's an encumbrance rule, and it's also a thing for setting up initiative. Pretty nice. Okay, damage and HP. Again, this game uses HP, it doesn't use harm. Characters naturally restore all lost HP after a long rest, so that's different from World of Dungeons, where you would roll your hit dice. Characterized by comfort, safety, and provisions. This camp requires a camp or stronghold free of danger or stress. A long rest is not a downtime scene, though it may prompt one. Additionally, a conscious character can attempt to heal themselves by rolling on a 7+, healing damage equal to the lowest d6 result plus aptitude. Likewise, a character can attempt to heal another character, healing damage equal to the highest d6 result plus aptitude. A character can only be healed by a given type of healing once between long rests. So this is just to incentivize characters healing each other because it creates more interesting roleplay. Very similar to the healing downtime activity in Blades in the Dark. All right, and injury tags you can take. These can become permanent. And you can heal tags, but with long rests. If you do not heal them, then they will become permanent tags. They can be overcome with magic, though. Gaining levels. So what does advancement look like in this game? Your character gains a level when they've accumulated sufficient XP, increase their level by 1, clear their XP, and gain the following. A new tag that encapsulates the previous level's activity, a new technique of your choice, so long as reasonably learned or acquired by magic or metamorphosis, plus 4 HP and plus 1 speed. If you wish, you can also rewrite any of your tags that no longer fit your character. So this is how you get XP. At the end of the session, your character gains XP as follows. So if you killed a meaningful enemy, you get 1 XP. If you made a meaningful discovery, 1 XP. If you approached a goal or cause, you get 1 XP to the PC, not to everybody. You get 1 XP to 3 XP for your downtime scenes. You get 1 to 3 XP depending on your loot. And you get 1 to 3 XP depending on mission completion, and 1 XP to sharing a meaningful social scene. So there's a lot of XP triggers, but basically this is following the sort of like dungeon world formula, which I generally like. I like this kind of thing. Having multiple sort of things to shoot for, I find to be satisfying. And then you can see the XP progression here. It is maxes out at level 6, which I quite like. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that, you know, in discussions I've had with a lot of people who play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, they usually say to me that the game sort of is best up to level 6, and then beyond there, it kind of doesn't work that well. And I sort of feel like that's generally true of games descended more or less directly from D&D. That level 1 to 6 is kind of where all the interesting stuff happens. The epic level play is like, I mean, you can do it, but I kind of feel like you're better off importing the character into a game that's more interested in that subject matter, instead of D&D, which is a game that generally focuses on dungeon crawling, hex crawling, adventuring, not being a lord or whatever. Okay, so NPCs. NPCs have these stats: speed, HP, a damage mod, armor, trait tags, and abilities. So they also get trait tags, which is interesting. Very much follows in the Apocalypse World, Dungeon World style of tagging enemies. And it gives you some pointers. Speed and armor can often be ignored if in a lesser fight. Most mundane humanoids have 0 to +2 damage mod and at most 1 armor. So these are just guidelines. Trait tags describe how the character behaves and reacts to the characters, like they're sneaky, brute, archer, demon. What I like about this is that you get these tags just like you would in most PBTA games. However, you also have a way of making more sort of like meaningful judgments on how that affects the mechanics, right? Because you can alter aptitude if the enemy has a tag that is especially potent against the PCs, which is that's pretty cool. I like that a lot. Abilities function much like a PC's techniques or the spells, moves, and supernatural abilities of other compatible games. Yeah, so these are just there to add some spice to the encounters, add some character. And there's a bunch of rules for making enemies. Alright, hirelings, horses, and hounds. So PCs can employ NPC allies, hirelings, beasts of burden, hunting hounds, etc., which function as a combination of NPC enemies and PC equipment. If the NPC ally has its own state of mind, such as an intelligent hireling, the GM controls it and notes its stats like any other NPC, adding a loyalty tag rated from -3 to +3. Using an ally as a weapon may cause the role to have advantage or disadvantage. So you can use them like equipment. However, when a PC gives a command to an ally NPC or uses them as part of another action, the hireling acts as a piece of equipment complete with tags, abilities, permissions, and ranges. I see. Okay. So what I like about this is, actually what I was trying to say is that having a loyalty tag is a little bit less interesting to me than having like the loyalty risk die in Macchiato Monsters. But it, you know, it does the job. You can set the NPC loyalty as follows, and you know, if they roll a 6-, then maybe you can reduce their loyalty as the GM. Most hirelings begin with neutral loyalty, but the PC commander can attempt to influence it, especially at initial hiring, by rolling. NPC loyalty also changes every mission based on their pay and share of loot, their conditions, treatment, and rations, the amount of danger and nature of their work compared to their expectations, how well informed they feel if they have a choice, the behavior and leadership of their commanders. So, you know, really, I feel like this might be a kind of thing where you basically do a Blade-style fortune roll to see if the PC's or the NPC's loyalty has gone up or down. And there's a move for if you're forcing a hireling to do a thing that tests their loyalty. If you crit, there you get more loyal. It's kind of fun. And NPCs can grant advantage or disadvantage to a PC if the ally is being used as a weapon. Again, I'm not super into this idea of having advantage and aptitude. I feel like maybe those things could be worked together, but I didn't write the game, so what do I know? All right, so surprise is handled with disadvantage, advantage, initiative, and turn order. In general, the most fitting combatant acts when most relevant at the GM's discretion. However, if everyone is engaged in a fracas, the combatants act in turn order from highest speed to lowest. Combatants of the same speed are acting simultaneously, but PCs act before NPCs. So there is an initiative system for resolving turn order, which I don't know. I mean, maybe it's necessary, maybe it's not. I think speed can have many uses, so I'm not really opposed to it being in the game. Movement, there is basically a you know, really granular movement system that you can use in case you're like running in a OSR module that actually cares about that stuff. But you know, I would just kind of use speed to determine who's moving more. PCs deal damage as follows. The damage dealt equals the lowest d6 result plus aptitude. And crits, you double your damage. and defeating enemies without damage. The GM can always declare that an NPC is defeated due to narrative circumstances rather than sufficient damage to HP. I kind of prefer the morale risk die in Macchiato Monsters to this. This feels like very, very flimsy, and I wonder if there's a way to like use tags or something to make that more interesting. But you know, it's here. PCs take damage as follows. So you can either have player-facing damage rolls or non-player-facing damage rolls, like GM rolls. It's up to you. If your character takes damage but still has 1+ HP, they're fine. If they drop to 0-, roll to see how bad it is. There's a death move. So on a 6-, they're dead if it's a lethal attack. If not, they're at 0 HP and incapacitated, but will die in 10 minutes if left untreated. On a 7-12, they remain conscious with 1 HP, but gain an injury. And on a 13+, they remain conscious with HP, equaling the lowest D6 plus aptitude, and don't gain an injury tag. So you can crit. And this is separate enemy damage rolls. So this is if the DM is going to, or the GM is going to roll for damage. In this method, the damage rolls often source from another game that is compatible with these rules. So for example, D&D, BECMI, or other modules. I recommend an upper limit of about 4d6 damage for the greatest foes. So what they're saying here is like, hey, if the enemies in the module you're using have a listed damage value, then you can go ahead and use that. If you're not referencing another game, you can often roll as follows. So a weak enemy will do a d6 minus 2, a normal enemy will do d6, a strong enemy will do d6 plus 2, and a very strong enemy 2d6. Anything above 2d6 is very capable of killing any level 1 or level 2 character in a single roll, so fair warning. Yeah, that's true. I kind of feel like in OSR games, you should have a fair number of those enemies, though. Because these aren't games designed to have the players in combat all the time. So, Enemy damage determined by PC roll. So this is quite interesting, actually. This method is basically the reverse of determining how much damage a PC deals. When the PC rolls to defend, they take damage as follows. On a 6-, the PC suffers damage equal to their highest d6 result plus any enemy damage modifier, usually plus 0 to plus 10. On a 7-9, the PC suffers damage equal to their lowest d6 result, and on a 10+, the PC suffers no damage. So that is a nice way to sort of like abstract out of particular damage values for enemies. And your stance has the following modifiers to damage, which is quite interesting. I don't know if this is a thing that people would tend to forget a lot at the table, but I do think it's an interesting idea. And armor is very, basically just subtracts from damage. There's armor piercing in the game, and armor is not used up when it's factored into a damage roll, unlike Blades in the Dark. Okay, now we get to downtime scenes. These I kind of like, but also kind of don't. There's things I like about them and things I don't like. So the downtime scenes are those in between action-packed sequences of adventure and combat. During such scenes, characters work on long-term projects, train, or pursue personal interests. They require the relative safety of an uninterrupted period of reprieve, such as in-between sessions or quests. During each downtime scene, each player picks one of the following activities. So you can acquire, just like acquire asset in Blades in the Dark. You roll to determine its quality. I don't know, is there a... there's no move for doing that. So I guess it's just, you get a crit, it's really good. You get a success, it's good. You get a mixed success, it has a downside. You get a miss, it's crap, or you don't get it. I don't know. I could have used a little bit more description there. Succumb. Engage with your core flaw and suffer its repercussions, but gain 3 XP. This is like indulging your vice. I don't know. Maybe this is good, but I'm trying to think about what I don't like about this. And I think what it is that it's right there as an option for the player to just do this thing and then gain 3 XP. I don't mind so much if this is a thing that is at the end of the session, but if it's an option for the player to just say, I want 3 XP, I'm going to engage with my core flaw, it feels unsatisfying to me somehow. But I would have to try it out and play to really decide. Train, you gain 1 XP. Okay, you know, fair enough. That seems totally reasonable. Treat, you can remove a non-permanent injury tag. And work towards a long-term goal or project. Roll to determine how much progress is made. I think this is kind of missing out a little bit by not having a clock system. Because how do you track how much progress is made without something to track it with? Social scenes. So social scenes are those in which one or more PCs reveal something meaningful about their character, the narrative, or a significant NPC. These scenes usually involve in-character roleplay between multiple PCs. Each PC involved in a social scene gets 1 XP. A social scene can happen as part of a downtime scene or in the free play of the game. It's just an interesting interaction that isn't about stabbing something. I kind of like this more. Maybe I just feel like, you know, engaging with your core flaw, getting 3 XP is maybe just too much XP. I don't know. But, like, this at least clearly involves another character. So, you know, I've used this kind of mechanic in other games I've written, like Dragons and Traveler's Tales, and it was quite effective. It's just, yeah, I'm not so sure about this one here. This one not so sure. But the social scene seems nice. Travel and dungeoneering. There are basically moves for traversing the wilderness. Traveling through safe areas should largely be ignored or abstracted. It's fair for the GM to say you travel for 4 days across the Orange Spring Plains without incident. When traveling through dangerous wilderness, hostile territory, ancient ruins, dungeons, or similar places, split time into travel turns. Each travel turn is 3 hours above ground or 10 minutes underground. So, you know, if you're underground, there's more frequent encounters. At the start of a travel turn, each PC describes their actions or their role and how it might help the party. Here are some examples. The torchbearer, scouting ahead, surveying, map drawing, rear guard, hidden reaction force, following in stealth. I'm not so sure about this wording. This feels very, like, modern to me. And the quartermaster keeps track of rations. Then the GM selects one PC to be the focus of this turn. PCs should rotate focus. The focus PC rolls, keeping in mind their action. On a 6-, there is a calamitous event, an avalanche, a loss of food, ambush, separation, capture, etc. On a 7 to 9, there is a problem, but the focus PC can see it coming, warn the party or affect its onset, and on a 10 to 12, everything goes as planned. On a 13+, everything goes very smoothly because of the focus PC's perception or quick thinking. So they give you some suggestions here of what the dungeon calamity might be depending on the role, or what the wilderness calamity might be depending on the role. So this is quite helpful, quite nice. It seems like a good system to me. Over longer journeys in which the GM has nothing particularly interesting planned, a travel turn can be zoomed out from several times a day to just once a day, or even once for the entire journey. The more often the party rolls for travel turns, the more dangerous, time-consuming, and narratively important the area they're traveling through is. So yeah, if you're doing a hex crawl, you know, even if you're on a long journey, you're probably going to roll a lot. If you're just, you know, traveling down the Royal Road, it's no big deal, right? You maybe get a few encounters you do over your journey. So, Weather and Wizards. If your game prominently features wilderness exploration, for example, a hex crawl or military campaign, weather and environmental hazards will be significant in your party's challenges and experiences. Weather events or hazards can be handled in several ways. As an obstacle for each PC to roll through, as combat for treating hazards or elements as enemies, or using the custom weather rules below. So this is really interesting, actually. This idea of treating the weather or hazards on the journey as enemies is like this super interesting inversion of the idea of treating... Okay, what am I saying here? The thing that Blades does, where they take the structure of opposition that you see with HP in most games descended from D&D, and they move that into clocks so that any kind of obstacle is always represented by a clock. This game takes that back and says, hey, any kind of obstacle can be represented by HP as well, right? It's like pretty much the same thing. So this is quite an interesting idea for how to deal with combating the elements, so to speak. And we have custom weather rules as well. So weather is an obstacle. So this is basically like making a skill check. It's kind of the standard way of doing things. But again, you have that ability to set aptitude, so you can actually take into account more of the things that are happening. So for example, Shorjal must travel through the freezing alpine forest on their way to Fort Grondel. Shorjal lacks winter wilderness clothing and supplies, so they roll at disadvantage. They have Armor 1, which applies a penalty to aptitude when traveling. The Pyromancer rolls 3d6, drops the highest d6, and applies -1 aptitude. They get a 7, just barely enough to survive, but get the injury tags Frostbite and Exhausted. So that would reduce your aptitude going forward. You can also treat the weather as an enemy. So basically it works like combat, right? They can have special abilities, like trip or knockback or paralysis, a speed, a damage modifier, and so forth. Namely, weather can have HP representing how much preparation is necessary to overcome or defend oneself against it. The PCs can deal preparation damage to this weather by rolling to attack as normal. Once the weather has been reduced to 0 HP, it is no longer a threat. And essentially, as I said, this is just taking the idea of clocks from Blades and bringing it into an HP system. So I really like this. This is very, very smart. And then finally, we have special rules for weather, which is to say that there is a custom move that you can use. So when the party is in a situation where wilderness or similar environmental hazards may harm them, the GM can force the focus PC, so that's part of the traveling, to roll for the party. This key member might be the trailblazer, the scout, the cartographer, or the local with the most knowledge of the environment. If you can't decide who the focus PC is, give it to whoever has the highest aptitude in the situation. If that still doesn't settle it, assign someone randomly by the roll of the dice. So on a 6-, everyone in the party takes 6 damage, ignores armor, gains an appropriate injury tag, frostbite, dehydrated, fatigued, etc., and gets lost, trapped, or blown off course. So it's like really bad. On a 7 to 9, everyone gains an injury tag as above, but takes no damage. Also, the GM chooses between everyone losing some equipment or everyone getting lost, trapped, or blown off course. On a 10 to 12, everyone gets through the weather without incident. On a 13+, everyone gets through the weather and the focus PC picks 1 benefit. Discover a shortcut or faster route, find a useful bit of unrelated information, or find a bevy of helpful resources that cut down on ration loss and uses of other equipment. I really like this. This is great. This is an awesome weather move, especially when you combined it with the use of aptitude. I feel like it's really capturing the situation in an interesting way, and it also leads to a whole lot of consequences. So I think it's really going to help to make weather feel meaningful and impactful in a way that it often doesn't in many games. You can take preparation. For example, you can have a planning roll, which gives you the opportunity of getting advantage. So this is kind of similar to having gambits in Blades in the Dark. And this is like the engagement roll, right? Which is quite nice. Preparation roll is distinct from planning, as preparation has more to do with equipment, supplies, and other tangible goods that will aid in the quest or mission. As with planning, select one focus PC. The focus PC rolls at advantage with significant information and resources to draw upon, or at disadvantage with little to nothing to aid them in their prep. So what this means is that if you get a 6-, the supplies they thought they'd bring are ruined, damaged, or lost in some way. The GM can select one thing from each PC that isn't key to their abilities at the moment they attempt to use it. On a 7 to 9, the party gets one prep use they can call upon at any time during the quest. This prep use produces an item, map, or other good that conceivably could be acquired before going on the quest. So this is basically like gear in the Sprawl. And you get more prep uses depending on your result. So again, yeah, it's like having gear in the Sprawl. It's quite cool. Traps. So traps can either be triggered, or traps are generally triggered. This isn't super interesting stuff. You know, it's just basically saying, like, yeah, you can try to interact with traps, but don't ask about traps all the time. This is a thing that, like, Jason Cordova has talked about in various podcasts with the way he does it, which is to say, like, don't put them everywhere. If it's sort of relevant to the situation, then maybe throw one in there and see if the thief can overcome it, right? You can get hunger, thirst, disease, and poison. These are basically conditions that have special effects. Every decay has a trigger, a time frame, and an effect. So these are quite interesting, actually, because they're very specific. So, like, hunger is less severe than thirst and dehydration. Poison is more severe than any of those. And it's very, like, time determined. So it feels like this game wants you to track time a little bit more granularly than many PBTA games do, which is, you know, kind of a concession to OSR stuff. But I wonder how effective that actually is at the table. Sometimes they have special moves, right? You can get zombie rot. You can make up your own debilities, decays. There are rules for overland travel. This is quite nice. Over open terrain, you get 3 miles per hour, or roughly 20 miles per day, assuming a break for food and camp at night. 20 miles, I believe, is like the standard size of a hex in most hex crawls. So there you go. Rough terrain, you get 10 miles per day, so that means you need that means you need 2 days to cross a hex on rough terrain, and harsh terrain means you would need 4 days to get across a hex. And the GM can estimate the party's daily travel distance by using the above as a baseline and modifying it with the slowest PC speed. For example, a party whose slowest character has -2 speed will cover 18 miles per day over open terrain. Again, that's a nice use of the speed mechanic for if you are hex crawling. This may feel like it is kind of like trivial and like outside of the core mechanics, but actually it would really help with the intercompatibility with OSR modules. There's rules for your pack animals as well. The magic system. So the GM, sorry, you can use techniques, you can use magical items, you can belong to the elf lineage, or you can use divine intervention or supernatural bestowment as your sources of magical power. Or just something else that represents your character or concept and has a trait. Characters without a magic-related trait would be unable to use magic. Makes sense. So you can attempt to use magic as described in a given technique and no more. How you acquired this technique might inform your ability to use or recognize magic. GM discretion, though usually not. So this is like a special thing you can do that gives you like 1 spell power. Magical items only grant their power while their specific criteria are met, usually when being wielded or otherwise connected to the PC using it. The elvish magic. As an elf, you have subtle arcane control. You can open your mind to and concentrate upon latent magical energies, even marshaling them to do your bidding. This affords you very weak magical powers, such as the ability to detect magical items and portals, read scrolls, use wands, etc. In addition, you can use magic as part of a role. The more you rely on magic and the more supernatural the intended effect is, the more dangerous it is for you, perhaps represented by stance. So, you know, maybe, yeah, you have to take a dangerous stance in order to cast this. A roll of 6- likely means you take damage or significant injury tag, cause unfortunate consequences, or even activate unintended and dangerous magical maelstroms. So this is similar to ritual magic in World of Dungeons. So Horst says gear is the least OSR element of Vagabonds of Dyfed. Using the stuff you have creatively is encouraging players to find a solution. Pulling something magically out of a hat does not. I completely agree with you there. Yeah, that's actually a very good point. So having that gear to spend does remove pressure, and it functions kind of like adventuring gear in World of Dungeons, but it's more general in what it can do. So, I mean, I feel like that is all true, and at the same time, as a GM, I would be quite particular about when I would allow players to actually make that preparation. I think I would only do it if they were in a very safe and well-supplied situation that they could make that roll. Otherwise, I think I would just make them rely upon what they can find in their environment and what they start out with. But again, this game, you know, it's not really very tables-based. So, or like random tables based. So you might not get the kind of interesting item loadouts that you get in some OSR games. Divine intervention. You can make packs, and that gives you a magic focus technique, which does like 1 thing. And magic from traits or other sources. This is very much like roll your own kind of thing. And arcane magic and similar artifice is powered by Azoth, a crystalline iridescent metal with a very low melting point. So this is similar to the use of Quicksilver in World of Dungeons. It appears as fractal cubes of pearlescent mirrors, casting a dizzying array of rainbows within and without. Check out Solid Bismuth for more real-world inspiration. So you can basically distill Azoth from stuff, gold, and other precious metals, gemstones, scrolls, wands, and magical artifacts, and the visceral components of magical or mythological beings, which this part kind of reminds me of Veins of the Earth, actually. Kind of interesting. Collecting and using Azoth is a prime reason why many arcanists go adventuring, as it is far more valuable than equal weights of gold. It's arguably more practical too, as it's needed in any permanent or stable form of magic, such as the forging of a magical sword or staff. And then they go into the uses of it. It can be used in rituals. It can be burned. It's quite interesting how much they go into detail in this. And it is basically stable, so it's not just going to blow up on you. It can be tattooed into your body, and this can also be like a trait that you take, right? So some spells can use Azoth, but not all of them require it. It has a value, and many ritual-based techniques list a required use of Azoth. Likewise, the GM can convert OSR spell components into quantities of Azoth based on their value. And you can try to augment yourself with Azoth. So you basically are doing a you're doing a kind of like a ritual to get special powers. Which is quite interesting. Once per level, you can do this. Any additional attempts cause damage, injury, and possible mutation. And they have a mutation table. And equipment. Equipment can give you mechanical modifiers. They can give you permission, or they can give you techniques, just like kind of anything else in the game. Some equipment have requirements, and some equipment have limited uses. You can get adventuring gear in addition to that gear we talked about earlier. And there are weapon tags to go through, familiar to anybody who's played Dungeon World. And they have some weapon examples. Kits. And other equipment is bandages, lanterns, rations, and torch. There's currency conversion. Typical kind of OSR thing. Very simple though. And silver is the standard currency. An interesting thing here, rather than list prices for weapons, armor, and kits, Vagabonds assumes that the price will be always haggled, negotiated, and altered as suitable for your setting. When determining the price of an item, think of the following based on the locale in which the PCs are purchasing it. The finished product's rarity, the amount of resources and logistics necessary for its construction or transport, the comparative isolation of the locale, the amount of recycled or second-hand product available, is the item unique or customized in some way, or is it able to be relatively mass-produced? So these help to set how much money they cost, but this is not actually something that seems that useful. Like, these are useful things to think about, but they don't really help you to determine the price in any meaningful sense. It would have been nice to maybe have like a table or a roll or something here. It feels a little bit weak. But at least they give you some things to think about. instead of having like inflation calculations and that sort of stuff. And then there's rules for making enemies. The GM can convert or create an enemy based on its qualities below. If you're converting from OSR games, you can ignore AC and 2-hit as the players make all rolls. There's more information on this in converting enemies. So like NPCs, enemies can have speed, HP, damage modifier, armor, trait tags, and abilities. There's a table for sort of judging speed and for HP. I like this quite a bit. Instead of looking at an enemy list and trying to figure it out, you can look at this quick table here, and that will help you as a GM to figure out what the HP total should be. Damage mod, armor, trait tags. Just some examples. You can, of course, make up more. And abilities. They give you a big list of abilities that enemies can use, which is pretty awesome for creating new monsters or adapting monsters. So yeah, there's rules for converting enemies. To convert OSR enemies and monsters, you roll core HP as is, HP or the hit dice times 4. You ignore 2 hit bonus. Hide to hit above +4 can be treated as the PC rolling to defend at disadvantage. Kind of nice. Roll damage as listed. There's a rule for converting descending AC, and there's a rule for converting ascending AC. And extreme saving throws, good or bad, can inform an enemy's trait tags and abilities. A character with a very high con save can force PCs to roll at disadvantage against poison or similar attacks that involve the enemy's fortitude or health. Saving throws of -2 to +2 can be ignored. And then there's special abilities and resistances, which you can sort of make into moves or tags. There's a rule for converting the movement speed, like how many feet per speed, which is useful again. And then we have a bunch of example enemies. And then finally, at the end of the book, there are some character archetypes. They give you a progression of traits that you can use, a pre-described core flaw, lineage, a list of techniques to pick from, and some equipment. And basically, you can see that characters are very simple, and also it'd be easy to either use these or hack them. They're useful for if you can't think of something yourself. But I like how the game puts thinking of something yourself at the front of things, because that kind of reminds me of just all the fun that I've had with doing class creation in World of Dungeons. So yeah, so that's Vagabonds of Dyfed. I think it is a pretty interesting game. I think there's a lot to like. There are some things where I feel a little bit iffy on it, like for example, that downtime move that involves playing to your core flaw. I'm not so sure about that, but I would like to see it in play. And generally speaking, I think that this is the kind of thing I would like to see for my OSR-inspired games. I've sort of talked down a little bit the idea of advantage and disadvantage in addition to aptitude. But the more I look into the rules and the way they've implemented it, the more it kind of makes sense to me. In the end, I still feel like I prefer the D6 dice pool system of Blaze in the Dark. But the way they've set things up here feels at least functional. And for those people who prefer 2d6 system, this does seem, or like 2 to 3d6 system, this does seem like it would be a pretty good fit. The main thing for me to take away in terms of my own sort of design ideas is the stance concept. I think is pretty interesting. I also really like the weather move. That's very cool. I really like the idea of presenting environmental threats as enemies that have HP that can be overcome. That's, again, a really interesting idea. And finally, I also really like the sort of character creation tags that they give here. These are very short, but they're still evocative, and I want to try to work something like that into All Systems Nominal, my mech RPG that I'm working on, which has a fairly similar sort of like core mechanical concept, also very, very heavily based on John Harper's games. All right, so that's pretty much my overview of the game. If there's any questions or comments before I wrap, then just shoot them in the chat and I'll respond. But otherwise, I think we're pretty much done here. Just waiting on that stream lag. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode of Let's Look At. Maybe we'll have some more games to look at in the future, but this was one that definitely jumped out to me and that I wanted to have a look at in a similar way to the Mecha Hack. So I think I'll leave things there. Oh, somebody jumped in with a question or comment. Oh yeah, go back and yeah, have a look at the rest of it. This is definitely an interesting game. This is a game I'm going to run in the future for sure. And yeah, if you do run it, then feel free to drop a comment on the video on demand. I'm always interested to see sort of new takes on Dungeons and Dragons that break with existing writing and rules conventions. So this is definitely one of those, and it feels like one that I would really want to run and sort of addresses some of the frustrations that I've had in both World of Dungeons and also in running some OSR games. So excited to see more of this. So with that, I will wrap things up finally, and I'll see you again next time.